A few things real quick. Especially around here, Idaho Falls. Again, election season is really upon us for around here. I encourage everybody. We're having a runoff election on December 2nd. Everybody needs to get out and vote. The election in November that occurred November 4th, only 25% of the people eligible or registered voters voted in Bonneville County. So 75% of us stayed home, and things happened, and everybody needs to get out. Another quick thing, 250 years ago this year, and 250 years ago next year, next July 4th, is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And so we're celebrating as well as the rest of America is celebrating what's known as the America 250 Commission. And Stand Up for Idaho is actually teaming up with KID News Radio 106.3, and we're doing a historical minute every week, a little bit of an advertisement, what happened 250 years ago roughly, this week and whatnot. And then every Thursday at 5 p.m., some ladies from Stand Up for Idaho actually gets on the Jolene Thomas show and gives us a little bit of a history lesson. And so it's really good. We really appreciate KID News Radio and supporting us and that too. And on that note, again, if you like what we do, we're on Rumble. Follow us, like us, all that. Give us a good thumbs up. We're doing a fundraiser. This is a flag that we've had. It's a car flag. It's beautiful. We're raffling that off. We'll actually draw that raffle in July of next year, July 4th next year. I'd like to encourage you to buy as many tickets as you'd like to. $20 a piece for a raffle ticket. Like I say, this is to help Stand Up for Idaho and fundraiser for us. Also, Ben Geeson in the back is selling some books. Now, he was here a couple of weeks ago, and just to make a short of it, understanding the money system and the mechanics of the money and how all that works. If you want to change the system, you have to understand how it works. And Ben did a good job of at least getting our interest peaked on how those things work. He's selling some books. Encourage you to buy his book and all that, because he said that he'll donate $5 per book that you buy to Stand Up for Idaho. So thank you so much for that, Ben. Pardon? The book's $25, right? $25. So he's going to give me $5 of that. Also, mark your calendars for February 7th. This is Stand Up for Idaho's primary fundraiser, if you will. We're going to have a little bit of a dance. It's a semi-formal, formal dance, and asking people to come and just enjoy, have a good time. It'll be from about 7:30 till midnight. We'll have a DJ and some appetizers and good things. You'll see some flyers come out on this, so I appreciate you writing that down and coming and supporting us. Okay, real quick, what we're going to do is, like I said, it's election season. We had some people, there were two positions that actually, in Idaho Falls, that did not get a majority vote. And one of them was mayor, and the other one was the city council seat too. We had a mayoral forum last night, and we're actually going to have a city council forum tomorrow night. So, and Teresa Dominic and Brandon Lee have both been invited to come over and talk about us and join us in that. So come tomorrow night, listen to that for the city council. What happens in Idaho Falls affects all of East Idaho. And so it's important that we pay attention to these things. Okay, real quick, next week, November 26th, we're not going to meet. Okay, it's Thanksgiving break. We're going to take that break. Wednesday, December 3rd, we're going to have Casey Whalen. He's an investigative journalist, come and talk to us about the 50 States, One Israel event. A few weeks ago, we had Representative Barbara Ehart actually come. She went to Israel as one of those 50 States, One Israel attendees. So actually, Casey's going to come and tell us some things that he's found out about all that. And it's quite interesting. Wednesday, December 10th, Jim Francis of Idaho Falls City Council is going to come and talk to us. There's always been a lot of questions about the apartments and all these things going up, and he's going to talk to us about what he calls it the land use decisions. A city council faces the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And I did sit down and talk to Jim for a little while, had lunch with him, and he just told us some of the challenges that a city council person has when it comes to things like this. And so he's willing to come and talk to us and share some, and try to teach us a few things. So I'm very appreciative of that. Wednesday, December 17th, we're having Karen Hyatt from the Idaho Transportation Department actually come and talk to us about the I-15 US 20 connector. That's how we're going to redo the whole interchange system here. I think a lot of us have heard about it, and there's been a lot of questions about it. So she's going to come and talk to us about that. And then the next one is Wednesday, December 24th. That's a Christmas break. That's Christmas Eve, and we're not going to meet Christmas Eve. And then the next one is actually December 31st. That's New Year's Eve. So you know what? We're not going to meet then either. So we're going to have a couple of weeks off, and that will be great for everybody. So anyway, that's what's coming up. Okay, keep an eye out. If you have your email and whatnot, I'll spam you once a week and let you know what's coming up and everything. So I do appreciate that. Okay, well, you're here. We came here tonight because gentleman David Ripley, he's the director of Idaho Chooses Life. Talked to him a little bit and had somebody, a mutual friend, suggest that I contact David and have him come and talk to us about an initiative that's going on and some things that are happening. And so I'm not going to steal his thunder or anything, but I'm going to just turn it over to him right now. And David, come on up here. Let's give David a big hand. He's came all the way from Boise, I think, and so he spent some time, and it's important that he came. I'm going to turn the mic over. If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone. Please use the microphone. All right, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
And talk to it like this.
All right.
Okay.
Well, Doug and all of you, I just want to thank you for the invitation. This is Idaho's facing a very critical challenge, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it and to help educate this community about the threat of the initiative. But I think it makes most sense to introduce myself to you and tell you a little bit about how I got into this work. Many of you may not know me. I came to Idaho actually in 1984 from Minnesota. And I was brought in by the National Teachers Union to save Idaho from itself and to bring a progressive politics to the state of Idaho. I was literally a card-carrying socialist at the time. And I belonged to the Democratic Socialists of America, the group that Mendami guy. He's too young for me to have known, but Barack Obama belonged, and we're about the same age. I'm not even sure. I might have smoked dope with him in some parking lot at a DSA convention or something. I don't know. Anyway, I came to Idaho to help get Richard Stallings elected to Congress and to try to bring a progressive politics to the state of Idaho, and was actually very successful at that. My primary client was the Idaho Education Association. I spent a lot of time in Idaho Falls, going back and forth, trying to do campaigns here. And I won't name names, but we won a lot of elections over here, trying to find more moderate Republicans and even Democrats. When I came to Idaho, I was very progressive and believed virtually all of it. I was pro-choice, not because I really understood the issue, but because it was just part of the inherited mantra that you had to agree to if you were going to be a Democratic operative. We won that election with Stallings in 1984. I stayed and decided to open up a political consulting firm, the first in Idaho, for Democrats at least. And we began working on electing progressive Democrats to the legislature when we could. When we couldn't, we'd find moderate Republicans to elect in the legislature in their stead. And I was very successful at that, which you can do if you have enough money. All of that came to a head in 1994, about 10 years later. The woman I was married to at the time decided to abort our son. And that's when I actually began to learn what abortion really was. And that presented me with quite a crisis. I remember going to a bunch of Democrat lawyer friends of mine trying to ask them for help to save his life. And one after the other, they told me kind of how foolish I was, because the fact is Roe v. Wade had erased fathers from the equation of that decision. I had no place, legally speaking, to present to a courtroom or to prevent the death of that child until after birth. And I realized that I had been helping to perpetuate this political system, and I had helped enable politicians in the state of Idaho and in Minnesota before coming here to advance this system where innocent children were being held accountable and being destroyed for the sins of the rest of us. I became pro-life in a day. I pleaded for his life with his mother, and I failed to persuade her, and she was a jury of one, and so that child was aborted over in Boise. I quit my job. At that time, I had actually closed my firm and became a full-time political operative for the teachers union. And I realized that I could not continue to work for them, having abandoned one of the core principles of the Democratic Party, which was a woman's right to choose. I attempted suicide a couple of days after that baby was aborted, because the reality of what I've been doing with my life and the blood on my hands from his death, but the death of many, an unknown number of children across the state of Idaho that I had helped enable and facilitate through the political action work that I've been doing. The guilt of that was overwhelming to me. And I was up north at a motel up there in Coeur d'Alene on my way to doing work for the union, and instead tried to end my life in St. Joe, along the St. Joe River. And I woke up the next morning after the drugs did not do what they were supposed to do, and realized that I was not going to get off the hook that easy. And I had to find a different way to live. So I crawled into, virtually, literally, into Coeur d'Alene. Spent about 3 days in this motel there. And my life was in a shambles, of course. And about the only thing I had with there was a Gideon's Bible in that little nightstand by the bed, and I decided I knew that I had to find a new way to live. I couldn't escape, the easy way, that I had to find a new way to live. And God, in His mercy, took pity on me. And He reached down and He took hold of me. And He forgave me for what I had been doing. He gave me a purpose. Within a few months, I started Idaho Chooses Life. And we've been at this for, we're about to start our 32nd year. of fighting to protect the innocent and to guarantee that Idaho has a future. God has blessed that work and given me the opportunity to meet and know many wonderful people in the state of Idaho. And a couple of them, three of them in particular, are here, and I'd just like to thank them. My dear friend Tom Lurcher is chairman of the House State Affairs Committee for many years and proved critical to passing many important pieces of legislation in the state of Idaho that laid the foundation for where we are today. And Tom is not in the legislature anymore, but he continues to serve on one of our boards, our 501c3 board, and I've come to love him dearly. And thank you for being here, Tom, and thanks for all that you've done to help us. We have Julianne Young, who is not in the legislature, but she's going to be again, I'm pretty sure. And during her time over there, she is just incredibly helpful to me and a real blessing and an articulate champion of the cause that we're fighting for and the value of human life against all comers. And she is a very brave and articulate woman, and I thank you for showing up and all that you have done. And Janelle Faulkner, thank you for the leadership you have in building a pregnancy center over here to help women in crisis. Because we know one thing about the pro-life issue and the pro-life cause. We don't deny for a minute that there are difficult circumstances that a woman might face when she finds out that she's pregnant. There may be problems in her life. There may be problems in those circumstances. But the fact is, we have a lot better solutions to those problems than abortion. And the pregnancy centers in the state of Idaho are on the front line of offering that love and that compassion and that practical help when women are in crisis. So thank you for the work you do. May the Lord bless you always. So over the course of 30-some years working at the legislature, we have begun to rebuild the wall, brick by brick, bill by bill, session by session. My first year at the legislature was really the best year we had was in 1998 when we passed a ban on partial birth abortions. And that was the first legislation, pro-life legislation, that the legislature had considered in 10 years. And I'm kind of the reason that's true. Because in the 1990 session of the legislature, there was an attempt to test Roe v. Wade, and the bill was passed called House Bill 625. It passed. Cecil Anderson was governor at the time. He manipulated the situation and ended up vetoing that bill. It became a national and even international issue and cause. And I came into a lot of money to defeat a lot of pro-life legislators who supported and led the effort to get that law, that piece of legislation passed. And as a result, there was no longer a trigger law in the state of Idaho. The legislature, the Republican leadership of the legislature, because of the fiasco of the 1990 election, decided that they were no longer going to deal with abortion and pro-life issues because it was too controversial. And so there was virtually a ban on pro-life legislation even being printed in the State House for almost 10 years. And 1998 was the year that we finally broke that dam. And there are some heroes over here, and one of them is not in the room, but I like to embarrass them even in absentia. Stan Hawkins was in the state senate at the time, And he is one of the key figures in the whole battle that got the legislature to they became willing to address the pro-life issue again and the abortion issue again. He defied the leadership of the legislature and insisted that he was going to call the bill out of committee and force a vote on the Senate floor on the ban on partial birth abortions, whether the leadership wanted it or not. And he was critical to us getting that bill passed. I bore you with all that history for several reasons. One is to help you understand the long fight and the many, many people that have participated in rebuilding a wall of protection around babies and around families and around recovering our values over a very long period of time during the dark years of Roe. The truth is, we have right now an initiative running, signatures are being gathered in this community across the state to repeal every single pro-life law that I worked to pass over the last 30 years, including the ban on partial birth abortions. Their claim is that they want to bring Idaho back to being Idaho. Well, that's a very distorted view of Idaho history. Let me tell you the history of the state of Idaho. In 1864, we became a territory under President Lincoln. The very first territorial legislature met to organize the territory and to begin to lay it down the first laws governing the territory. It's kind of hard for those of you who've been in the legislature. They came out of that session with a little pamphlet about that thick, to cover all the laws governing the new territory. Now you have to have a library to have all the laws that have been enacted ever since. But in that session, they came out with a little comic book version of the law, dealing with the most important things. Cattle rustling, bank robbery was bad, murder was pretty bad. And they took the time to say, and by the way, abortion is bad. In the very first territorial laws of this state, before we were a state, the legislature said, abortion except to protect the mother's life is a felony and a crime. The legislature reenacted that code section numerous times over the next 110 years. In the beginning, in 1907 specifically, the president of the Idaho Medical Association and the Idaho Medical Association itself in convention pushed the legislature to recodify that law because they were afraid that there were people beginning to move into the state claiming to be doctors who were practicing abortion. And they wanted to make it clear that there was no room in the profession or in the state of Idaho for such characters. That was the law in Idaho for 110 years until 1973, when Roe v. Wade was imposed upon the state by the U.S. Supreme Court. The legislature in 1973 was aghast at the idea that we were going to renege on those fundamental values and resisted for some time until they were persuaded by the Attorney General and others that we had no choice but to comply with the Supreme Court ruling. But that legislature said, fine, this can't possibly stand. This ruling is so evil and so outrageous that this couldn't possibly stand. So if we're going to comply, we're going to simultaneously enact a trigger law, they called it. As soon as the world comes to its senses, as soon as the court fixes what they've done, or Congress overrides what they've done, or the people of America override this horrible decision, we're going to have a trigger law in place so that automatically our laws are going to revert to what they have always been, protecting life, affirming the value of life. And that law was on the books from 1973, the trigger law from 1973 all the way until the 1990 session. As I mentioned, in the 1990 session, Cecil Andrus finagled the world around and got the legislature to repeal that in the hopes that he was going to sign House Bill 625, which of course he didn't. He vetoed that bill as well. When I came into the pro-life movement, I began to approach the issue of legislation and life with a kind of a practical mind. We came to each session trying to figure out what bill could we bring to save as many lives as possible, as quickly as possible. Parental consent became one of the primary issues. I actually ended up getting that passed through the legislature, I think 5 times. We'd pass it, and then we'd get sued. We'd end up in Judge Windmill's court, and he would say there are certain things we couldn't do to protect girls from the abortion industry, so we'd have to make amendments and then pass it again and so forth. And we started that process in 1998. And the last time we passed it was in 2007. We finally finished that work. Took 10 years to get that law in place. And I mention that because that law also is threatened by this initiative. Were that initiative to become the law of Idaho, there would be no parental consent required for abortions. Meaning our children, our daughters, our granddaughters, our nieces would be threatened again by the abortion industry and by the ability of that industry to prey upon innocent children who have been caught up in some situation without the ability of their parents to intervene on their behalf. I long wanted to get that trigger law replaced on the books because I was involved with Andrus in those years of conniving to get that law repealed. And it was something I felt very strongly that I had to fix. But I kept putting it off because it didn't bear any immediate promise of fruition. So we always put it off in lieu of other pieces of legislation that might save more babies faster. But in the 2020 session, the Lord was really beating me up pretty bad, honestly, wanting me to get that done. So that became a priority for us, that legislative session. It was one of the easier bills I got to get through the legislature because politically it was kind of easy peasy for a lot of legislators who got to vote pro-life, but without much consequence. People back home really wouldn't be too upset about it because it didn't actually do anything. And so legislators were kind of patting me on the head saying, this is going to be such a nice bill to vote for. We should get this done. But the Lord knew that important things were coming. And just 2 years later, Roe was overturned. And I always knew that law, that tyranny of the Supreme Court was going to come to an end. I wasn't sure I'd still be here to see it, but I knew that law couldn't possibly stand. And the miracle of miracles, after some 50 years, Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court. And within months, the trigger law in Idaho was going to take effect. That law, which has since been recodified as the Defense of Life Act has been in place now for about 3.5 years. It's the best law in the country, and it's been under constant attack since before it took effect. Idaho was the first state sued by the Biden administration in federal court as they tried to reassert federal control over the abortion issue. You may have heard of the case. It actually ended up going to the United States Supreme Court. The EMTALA case, in which they twisted the Social Security Act to impact the abortion issue, to require hospitals to perform health abortions in violation of Idaho law. We've been sued 4 other times. In fact, we just got another case. We just had another victory but last week. And the fact is that law has survived, I think, 5 or 6 major legal challenges. It's been upheld by the Ninth Circuit, by the United States Supreme Court. It's been upheld by the Idaho Supreme Court. It's been upheld by the 4th District Court. And it's been just upheld again by the Federal District Court in Idaho in the most recent lawsuit, where the Satanic Club or Satanic Religion, or I don't know exactly what they call them, but Satan's in the word, so I'm sure of that part. They sued because they claimed that the Defense of Life Act was a violation of their religious liberty. The judge in that case, Judge and I, thankfully, gratefully, just dismissed the case as being unfounded and ridiculous, basically. We have fought over the last 3.5 years in the legislature, every single session, over various attempts by the medical community largely to weaken the law, to add exceptions, to allow for additional licenses to kill, basically. The story of how that law survived all of that in the face of an unrelenting attack by very, very powerful interest groups is really a biblical story. It is amazing what God has done to defend and protect that law through all of those challenges and all those twists and all those turns and all those threats. And the fact is, the law still stands today. And it's still protecting women, it's still protecting babies, it's still protecting our future. Today, the abortion lobby, in partnership with some groups, big medicine groups in Idaho, are attempting to turn back the clock. They want to go back to the golden era of abortion on demand. The initiative that they're proposing, my best guess is that they are at about 50,000 signatures. They need to get about 75,000 signatures by April in order to get it onto the ballot, the next general election ballot of 2026. That initiative is very cleverly written and is very deceptive, which of course is one of the hallmarks of abortion and the abortion industry. It would repeal every pro-life law passed in the state of Idaho. There would be no more parental consent. There would be no waiting period. There would be no more requirement that women are informed of their options, including pregnancy centers, including the health risks of an abortion. Abortion would be allowed in the state of Idaho for any reason through all 3 trimesters of the pregnancy. I believe that the state of Idaho will reject that if they know what it is it will actually do. Which is why I'm here. My hope is to continue to fight to get people educated enough so that they don't sign that initiative in the first place. That'd be the cheapest, safest, easiest way to protect our future. But even if they're able to get that on the ballot for the next year, we're going to have a tremendous fight. I'm told that they're going to spend $3 to $5 million in the state of Idaho trying to persuade you and your neighbors to support this terrible, terrible proposal. It's hard for me to imagine how I'm going to raise that kind of money to beat that. But I look at what God's done already in defending this law from huge interest groups, from the unrelenting attacks from the media, from lawsuit after lawsuit. And I believe that we are going to find a way, and God will provide a way so that we can, I doubt, meet that kind of financial threat. But we will find a way. There will be a path created for us to win that fight and continue to protect babies. And here's the thing. We estimate that over the course of the Roe years, some 90,000 Idaho babies were murdered through legalized abortion. That's the official count anyway, somewhere in that neighborhood, which would make it the fourth largest city in the state of Idaho. And actually bigger than that, because over the course of 50 years, many of those 90,000 babies would be married and be having children and maybe even grandchildren of their own. In the 3.5 years that the Defense of Life Act has been in place, we estimate that somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 babies in Idaho have been saved from abortion. Now that's just a number. But if you think about each single life, that is an amazing, amazing thing that is happening. And it makes us one of the most important states in the country. Even though Roe has been overturned, many states have continued to embrace legalized abortion. Idaho is different. That's what this message is. If we can beat this initiative, I believe we can not only save Idaho, I think we can lead America back to what it used to be, to the values that made it the greatest country ever. With that, I'd love to take your questions. I know there's been a tremendous amount of misinformation, propaganda generated out there by the state's media and very powerful organizations. Some of you may have doubts in your own mind about the law and about how it's working and about the threat it might pose to doctors or women or whatever. And I would like to just tackle those on. So if you've got questions, hopefully I've got some answers for you.
Yes. What's the difference between Idaho Chooses Life and Stand Up for Idaho?
Doug, you want to take that?
Well, yeah, actually, the difference is we're two totally different organizations. Stand Up for Idaho is an organization. We're a nonpartisan, non-denominational, nonprofit that's standing up for a lot of issues, for Idahoans. And there's a lot of things going on once you start learning what is happening in Idaho. This is just one example of some things that are going. So Idaho Chooses Life, David is focusing on this issue. Stand Up for Idaho's purpose, if you will, is to try and bring these things to light to everybody so they understand what is going on, and they can make up their own minds about how they want to deal with things and fix things. So that's the primary difference. That's the difference between us. Just two totally different organizations. Okay.
So you talked about financing and that you had lots of money to work on some of these projects. Is that just charitable donations that come to you, or where does that money come from, and how do you see the financial battle lining up right now? Is it those guys are 10 times more powerful than we are to save life, or are we about even?
Okay, so if anybody here heard me say that I got plenty of money, please, I must have misspoke. Okay, because that's never been a problem for this ministry. I'll tell you that. I had plenty of money when I worked for the teachers union back in the day, which is why I was able to wreak so much havoc. All I know is, I mean, I've worked in campaigns and politics my whole adult life. So I know what money does, and I know how to use it. I know what it can do to distort the record and to mislead people and so forth. So I'd be lying if I told you that I was not worried about the amount of money the national abortion industry is going to be pouring into the state of Idaho. See, the thing is, in the big scheme, they don't really care about Idaho except for the storyline. They see Idaho as one of the states defying their agenda nationally. So they have been rampaging through the states. They've done 7. We are going to be the 8th state in which they've come in and tried to do through the initiative ballot measure to try to restore abortion rights in various states. They have succeeded in 5. They have worked themselves into a draw in 2. And by that I mean they've not really won what they were after. So, for example, in the state of Florida, last year they came in and had an initiative to amend the Constitution in the state of Florida. That required a 2/3 vote by the people. They only got to 60% to establish an abortion right in the state of Florida. So they didn't get what they wanted, but a 60% yes vote in the state of Florida is pretty scary, right? They have yet to be defeated. I believe Idaho may be the state that will do that. I believe we may be the state that finally turns the corner and tells the abortion industry no. They've got to be defeated somewhere, sometime, if we're going to save America. And I think they have wanted to come into Idaho since the very beginning. That's why we were the first state that Biden sued. They wanted to come in last year with this initiative. They were threatening the initiative that summer of 22. But they were afraid of Trump and the turnout rates in the state of Idaho, which tells me that we've got a very good chance of beating them in the state of Idaho. They waited to do this to get a gubernatorial election where the turnout is, generally 20-25% lower, which gives them a much better chance of overwhelming us with, their propaganda. With respect to money, I think $3 to $5 million is a reasonable estimate of what they're going to spend. It's going to feel more like $10 million because the cost of media, at least nationally, compared to national rates, is cheaper. So it's going to feel like everywhere you go, you're running into TV, radio, direct mail, whatever. In the 30-something years I've been doing this, we have 2 organizations. We have a political action committee and we have a 501c3. Combined, I've never come anywhere even in the never even close to that kind of money. Never. And to be honest with you, as I stand here before you, I have no idea how in the world I'm going to raise half of that. I don't even know how I'd raise $1 million. But I also know that God has carried us a long way in this thing through a lot of really bad odds fights. And somehow we are still here. And somehow the law still stands. And it has been vindicated over and over and over again. And I believe that if we have a critical mass of money, we can convince Idaho, once they know the truth about the law, they're going to realize the law works. The law is working.
Another question? Oh,
I'm not sure how to say this. I do know of a way that this whole issue can be resolved 100%, because the argument has always gone towards focus on the woman. However, if you think about it, without the man, there would be no baby. So if there was more 100% focus on the man's responsibility to cover himself with a condom, then the problem would be 99.9% solved. And if the men were held accountable and responsible for their part, the issue would go away from the woman and be more focused on the man. The first time I heard that argument was pretty good. That it has never been spoken about, never gone on a national level. No one has ever really brought that to light. But certainly, if that were pushed and showcased everywhere, it might help get somewhere to take the pressure off. To take the pressure off the woman, because they're attacking the wrong person. If you think about it that way, my question would be, is there a way to get that point across and publicized and if we use propaganda in that way, would that how would that be received?
I really appreciate that question. For what this is worth, so when back in 1994 and into 1995, when I was wrestling with what to do, I knew that after the loss of my son, I realized that I had to do something to make amends for the mess I had helped build in the state of Idaho. And but I was a recovering liberal. So my mind was muddled on all sorts of things. And beginning with the part that abortion is a woman's issue and a woman's problem. I believed that, like it had been pounded in me since I was in junior high school. And I remember as the Lord was really weighing in on me to get involved and to do something and to start Idaho Chooses Life, I just told my wife this story the other day. I literally argued with him about it. I was like, Lord, I'm the wrong person. Okay, first of all, I'm the wrong gender, I'm the wrong race, and what we got to do is to go find a woman to go out there, maybe a woman of color. Already I was DEI to death, right? In order to get this message across, as God's political consultant. I'm telling you, I'm the worst person. I should never do this. Is not going to work out. Well, God, in his sense of humor, decided not to listen to me. So here I am. We started Idaho Chooses Life, and the longer after I got some healing, I got some, some scriptural education, and I got some healing and some more education, and I started to learn more about the issue. I began to realize one of the great lies of the abortion issue, of the whole abortion, I mean, going back decades to the beginning, was that abortion is a woman's issue. That's a great lie. It's one of the first foundational lies that has brought this country to such a mess. Because what it does is it removes men from responsibility, and it forces women to change how they behaved, how they thought about their bodies, how they thought about their sexuality. It turned men into predators, basically, who are able to satisfy themselves sexually and carnally without taking responsibility. It turned a whole generation, 2 generations of men into people who were not prepared and were not expected to take responsibility. But it also put women in this awful situation of being the people and the person left holding the bag, as it were. And if you look at this in a scriptural way, which is the only way I know how to do this, God taught us about all these things. He taught us about family. He taught us about marriage. He taught us about the proper role of men in terms of being the protector and the provider and the caretaker, and the woman's role and the man's role. And I know this is politically incorrect, but the fact is, God's truth has often been politically incorrect. And I'm just telling you, that's how it works, okay? That's how it works. God built us that way. That's how we're designed. And the simple truth of the matter is that one of the things that has to happen in Idaho and everywhere else is that we've got to reaffirm the honor and value of men. We've got to reaffirm men as honorable. We have to reassert the power and the responsibility of men to be men, to take responsibility for their own children and for their own families, but also to take responsibility for being responsible to the women that they're engaged with and involved with. And the fact is, that's going to require a whole paradigm shift that is going to take a long time, because we have gone very, very far down this road of destroying ourselves and destroying the family, because we have denigrated fatherhood. We've dismissed men. We've dismissed responsibility. And I say this, it's easy at the legislature to talk about, well, we're going to go and we're going to put the boots to men for child support. That's how we're going to fix this problem. Well, that's stupid, okay? The fact is, the laws are already very draconian with respect to child support, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about changing the paradigm, which says a woman can make a decision over this issue all by herself. That is wrong. She didn't make that baby by herself. In fact, there was a man involved in that equation somewhere, right? We've only known of one immaculate conception of all of history. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing every time, right? We also know, by the way, that there's a third party involved in conception and the creation of life. And we must reaffirm God's role in this also. Because the fact is that life in that womb does not belong to that woman. That is a unique, one-time only creation of both the man, the woman, but God Almighty. I saw a video. I've been working this. I learned more stuff about this issue every day. About a year ago, I ran across this story about scientists having captured this amazing moment of conception on camera. And I read this story. I was like, okay, that can't possibly be true. I mean, I'm sure they got conception, but the story was they caught the moment of conception when there was this flash of light. And I'm like, okay, that's got to be some pro-life guy made that up. You know what I mean? Like, that can't, I mean, that sounds too good to be true. So I started researching it, and I kept finding all these images of scientists that have literally captured the moment of conception. And what do you know? There is a flash of light at that very moment. Now, they got some kind of hokey dokey scientific explanation for this, but I got a better one. That's the God moment. That's the God partnership. That's the same force that spoke the cosmos into being. That's why the legislature or a doctor or a woman or a husband does not have the right to kill that baby. Because the God part of the equation must be taken into account. That is a new life made in God's image that belongs to Him.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
And I guess it's about the abortion industry. And the comment just a minute ago was about, I assume, unplanned pregnancies. What about, and I don't know whether this is true or whatever, and I'm just wondering, is there my perception is a lot of pregnancies and abortions are actually planned. There's a big industry. And is it for body parts? You hear constantly a lot of these things, it's the unplanned pregnancies. I don't know, are they the majority of things, or is there actually an active effort to cause pregnancies and to therefore cause abortions to be able to harvest the fetal material? And, that would be my question. And if that is the case, because to me, there's got to be, if there's so much money being spent to make this happen, there's got to be a huge financial benefit for it. And is that industry focused really on causing pregnancies, having them occur so that abortions can occur, so that the fetal material can be sold off to whomever?
I will say there's there's about 12 different major questions buried in what you just asked me about, right? I would guess, based on my current state of awareness, that most abortions do not involve some conspiracy to get pregnant in order to harvest the tissue, because I don't think the industry would need to do that yet, because there's so many messed up people out there having sex and without forethought and responsibility, who then look at abortion as a birth control method. Basically, there's the supply, in other words, is we are still even under Dobbs, even after Roe, we're still killing tens of millions of babies a year in this country. Okay, so your question, however, this is the thing. Over the course of the decades, we have there is not a single institution that has not been compromised by abortion. And leading the charge is the medical community, but you've got the pharmaceutical industry that is up to its throat in using aborted fetal tissue and aborted baby parts for research purposes. I mean, we just went through that. The legislature, Tom was chairman of that committee when we brought a legislation when that scandal broke, right? The undercover videos of Planned Parenthood selling aborted baby parts, for which they've never been held responsible, by the way, to this day. The only person who's ever been legally held accountable is the poor guy who uncovered it, David Delayed. But the corruption in the pharmaceutical industry and in the medical research industry, the major corporations that are using fetal tissue, is a horrific scandal. And it's also, and probably still true, even under Trump, the federal government is involved in funding a lot of that research. We ran across that during COVID. We started getting calls. People were calling the ministry asking us for information, background information on which of these supposed vaccines were produced using aborted fetal tissue. And the fact is, that was very difficult information to come across. It took months to figure out and uncover who was on first and who was doing what and how that vaccines were being produced. Most of the vaccines actually during the COVID era were compromised, aside from bad medicine, were compromised by fetal tissue and were being produced by fetal tissue. We have the cosmetic industry often is involved in using aborted fetal tissue in production and manufacturing of cosmetics. On and on the list goes. Our legal institutions, our medical institution, our court system, our higher educational system has been compromised by legalized abortion. And I would tell you that almost every single social problem that we are dealing with today has some connection to the abortion issue. Illegal immigration is a byproduct of the fact that we have killed some 70 million babies over the course of the last 50 years. Those are workers. Those are nurses. Those are doctors. Those are engineers. Those are consumers that aren't here. The Democratic Party made a conscious decision to embrace illegal immigration in order to fend off the impending economic catastrophe of a dwindling workforce. Bill Clinton admitted that last fall.
This thing. I just wanted to find out, trying to understand how these things get out with getting the signatures, the petitions and things. Who puts them together? What is it about them that they can't make it, that they have to prove what they're saying is real? It seems like they twist words, as you say, and so people don't really know what they're actually signing. They think they're signing something and it's totally the opposite. And is there some, and I know that happens in even other things too, and I've always wondered, why is that? Is there no checks and balances for that kind of thing?
Well, in my personal opinion, I think the state of Idaho, if it's going to survive, is going to have to, at least in its current form, as a pro-family, conservative, low-tax, great place to live, we are going to have to deal with this initiative process because it's the Achilles heel of Idaho. And this is what destroyed California. They started running one initiative after the other. Now it's turned into, I mean, they've every general election they've got dozens of them, right? That's called direct democracy, right? You've got billions of dollars. There's a whole it's a whole sector of the economy in the California, the election industry, right? Consulting firms that are set up to jam through for some special interest group one initiative after another, right? And one scam after the other, and it has made California virtually ungovernable. And we are starting to see the same things beginning to happen here. It seemed like a good idea at the time the founders put it into the Constitution, but I don't think they anticipated what the future held for us, right? So right now we have another initiative going on, which is I'm also concerned about, although I'm not allowed to have opinions about any other issue publicly except, babies. But there's a medical marijuana initiative being circulated right now. And it's kind of funny because both of these two initiatives share a lot of common ground in terms of their deception level, let's call it that. They both rely upon plying people with sad stories and playing upon people's compassion to get them to vote for policies that they otherwise wouldn't, right? So they will show you the lonely vet who is disabled, whose only relief is being able to smoke a joint sometimes. And so people they feel bad for the vet. And they go, well, I don't want that guy to suffer, right? So we should legalize that just for that kind of case, right? Likewise, you're going to be seeing all kinds of videos and stories about how this law is so difficult for doctors. It's so difficult for women to navigate, and how terrible this law is. And in fact, the name of the group officially sponsoring the abortion initiative is called Idahoans for Women and Families. Now that's kind of ironic, to say the least. Because, generally speaking, you have to have babies to have families. That's right. And in fact, they are telling people when they're getting those initiatives, asking them to sign, that this is about helping to encourage more babies. And they get away with that because they threw in at the bottom of this initiative language which supposedly will protect IVF, in vitro fertilization. Now, the scam part of this is that in vitro fertilization is already legal in the state of Idaho, has been legal forever. And there's never been a piece of legislation introduced in the legislature to restrict it or outlaw it. Many people in the legislature have used IVF themselves. But this is one of the ways that they can use that language and that part of the initiative to confuse people into thinking that they're for families and they're for women and so forth and so forth. And so it is very frustrating. It's very dangerous because it's going to take a lot of money to educate people about what exactly this bill, their initiative, will do. And I have no doubt that if somehow we get the word out, people are going to say, no way. Even if they have concern about the law because of something they've heard, abortion on demand through all 3 trimesters and no parental consent, I mean, the decimation of families through that part of the law alone is completely crazy and alien to the people of Idaho. There's no doubt about that.
Question?
Are there any statistics that show what percentage of unplanned pregnancies the fathers don't even know that the mother got pregnant and that she's choosing abortion when he would be more than happy if given the opportunity to know that. Are there any statistics to show what that looks like?
Not to my knowledge. The only information I could offer you that way is by way of anecdotal, stories, right? Like mine, for example. But this is part of the consequence of building a culture which denigrates fatherhood and denigrates men, right? It's easy to say, well, we ought to go beat up more men in order to get them to pay their child support. But that's the last part of the equation, right? That's the least that should happen, right? And we must recreate and reestablish and honor fatherhood as part of this rebuilding a culture of life that rebuilds families, that rebuilds a culture in which these babies are welcome. And that's going to take time. But I guess the next thing that has to happen before we get there, we got to beat this thing next year if it gets onto the ballot. And I'm here to ask for your help. There's a bunch of literature on the back. Everything back there is free. I have a book back there that tells some of my story that, if you want to know more about that, which is only important because it just shows how good our God is. And if anybody here, by the way, has an abortion history that you're struggling with, I just want to assure you that our God is big enough and his love is strong enough to set you free from that. And I want to give you hope for this.
David, this is kind of just a question about information. Speaking of in vitro fertilization, I know that it's in a test tube and it's not in vivo, which would be in life, a pregnancy. Isn't that sort of the same thing when there are 8 ovum who get fertilized, and one is kept and implanted in a woman, and the 7 are actually fertilized, the other 7? Does that make sense? Isn't that the same thing, throwing those away, as an abortion?
So the position of Idaho Chooses Life is that we do not have an official position on in vitro fertilization per se, as in the specific procedure that takes an egg and a sperm outside of the natural procreation process, joins them artificially, and then creates an embryo. That specific process we do not have an objection to, or even an official position on, I guess. The problem becomes with a lot of the rest of it. So in the practice of, prior to the Defense of Life Act taking place, it was normal for these clinics to harvest 8, 10 eggs, fertilize all of them, grade them according to, in test tubes, according to some whatever stuff they come up with, to pretend that they know how viable each of them are, right? And then implant several, maybe 8, maybe 10, and then see which of them over the course of a couple of weeks became the most viable in their opinion, right? That attached and became the most viable. And then they would engage in what they call a pregnancy reduction procedure. And that would be determined by the parents deciding how many of those babies they actually wanted to keep. And in other words, they were performing abortions on 6 or 7 of the 8 or whatever the number is, right? that was standard procedure prior to the Defense of Life Act happening in the state of Idaho, and I'm sure it's still standard procedure outside of the state of Idaho in other states that, like Oregon, California, Minnesota, that have embraced, death, right? They can't do that legally in the state of Idaho anymore. There is nothing prohibiting the fertilization of eggs, numerous eggs, outside of the womb. There is, because of the way the law is written, they cannot cull the herd, as they say, by removing embryos from the womb that they've implanted. Once that happens, that's a pregnancy, and that would be an abortion, and that would be going to jail, right?
Mm.
So the question still, there's a lot of gray area in the law in Idaho, and there are problems, ethical problems, that the legislature has never really wrestled with. The IVF industry has never really wrestled with. There's been this kind of knife edge, silent agreement about not blessing those things without making them illegal either, right? So if in fact the medical community and the IVF industry continue to press the legislature on this issue, and I've actually spent the last 2 years, or maybe even 3, I don't even know, at least 2, a lot of conversations going on in the legislature, because the Democrats decided about 2 years ago that this IVF thing was their ticket to splitting the pro-life movement and embarrassing Republican pro-life legislators. Mm-hmm. So what they want to do is to force an issue in which the legislature says it's okay to, because we believe in life, it's okay to go make test tube babies, implant them, and do whatever you want with them, because as long as it produces the hope of a child eventually, right? And they want to force legislators into voting no or yes on that issue, because it will cause them all kinds of problems one way or the other, right?
I see.
But the fact of the matter is that these are very serious ethical questions that if they continue to press this, they may get answers out of the legislature that they don't want, the industry, I mean.
Mm. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? David, any last thoughts or something, I guess? So.
Yes, sir. Well, I just want to thank you all for being here. And I ask you to keep this ministry and me in your prayers, because the fact is it's totally unlikely that we're ever going to outspend these people. So we're going to have to outgod these people. And the consequences for Idaho are very profound. To be spiritual about this, Idaho is about to enter the valley of decision, a time of choosing. This thing gets on the ballot. Unlike every other part of this abortion history, we're going to have every individual adult person eligible to vote, I believe, is going to be held responsible for the decision they make at that ballot box. Even the decision not to vote is going to carry eternal consequence, because what's going to be on the ballot is this decision that Moses presented the Israelites back in Deuteronomy, his last speech to the Israelites, where he said, I set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your seed may live. That's where Idaho Chooses Life got its name from that talk. Because we believe Idaho, it's a prayer and a hope that Idaho will choose life. But that's the question before us next year if this goes the way it looks like it's going to. And for many of us, we won't have a firsthand experience. We don't deal with the abortion issue. Most of us are past those days. But now the question becomes for us, what kind of world are we going to leave behind us? What kind of Idaho are we going to leave to our children and grandchildren? And I'll tell you, I believe with all my heart that promise by our Creator in Deuteronomy about the curses of choosing death and the blessings of choosing life. That's what's on the table. Idaho is blessed because we have a leadership in Idaho that has chosen life repeatedly over and over again and has defended life over and over and over again in the courts and in the court of public opinion. And Idaho is reaping huge blessings that sometimes we don't even take the time to notice. But they're real. And you look at the states that have embraced abortion, they are paying the price. They don't necessarily recognize it as being related. The destruction of Seattle and the destruction of New York City, and the election of a communist mayor in both of those towns, by the way. The drug problem in Portland that's just eating it alive. That is part of God's judgment on those towns and on those communities because they have embraced death. And we have a responsibility in the time that we have left to fight this evil so that we leave an inheritance behind us in which life is valued, life's honored, so that Idaho has a future. So, God bless you and thank you for your time.
David, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me shake your hand. Thank you. This is very powerful. What I would encourage everybody to do is actually go out and get the link to this off of our Rumble channel and send it to your friends and your family and everybody that you know, because I think it was a very powerful, and I really do appreciate it. And it makes me think of a few things. You know, my wife and I, we didn't have our first child until we were married after about 8 years. We weren't going to have kids. But, you know, the moment my son was born, my life changed. And then the moment my daughter was born, my life changed again. Okay? And like I say, before that, you know, we were dual income, no kids and all this, and it just never were planning on having kids. But life happens, and that's good. Recently, I was blessed with my first grandchild. And it just is, I'm just so thankful that we have him and that we were blessed with him and everything. And I just can't imagine looking where I am now and back through my life. I cannot imagine not having my children. And I think that a lot of people are, I don't know, I'm missing out on a lot. And so anyway, obviously, you know, I'm with David on this here. You know, abortion needs a last resort. You know, you can't never say never or anything like that, but it's a last resort. And I don't know about the industry and whatnot, but it's obviously there's a lot of power, a lot of money going on trying to make it so that if it's not a conspiracy type thing, then what they're doing is they're preying on the innocent. And that's wrong. And we need to do what we can to stop that. Because we're standing up for, and I'll put the pun in, we're standing up for the unborn. Okay? We're standing up for the unprotected. We're standing up for the the lady that doesn't understand. There's a question asked back here about, does a man even know? A real quick story is I know a guy that got a call one day from a court saying that his girlfriend was putting a baby up for adoption. He had no idea that he was a father. None whatsoever. And he says, wait, time out. No, I'll take her. And he raised her, his daughter, from an infant, her entire life. And he by himself. Well, he had a grandma helping him, but he was a solid dad. Okay, and so there's a lot of issues going on, a lot of things, but I can guarantee you right now he feels blessed that he found out about his daughter. So we need to stand up for these things. We need to stand up against a lot of the evil and a lot of the things that are happening. There are a lot of, there's a comment about another initiative coming on. There are actually, in Idaho, a few initiatives that are up. There's some constitutional amendments that are up. We need to pay attention to what they are, not what the title says, not what the title infers, but what does it cause? What does it actually mean? Because if we don't, we're apt to vote the wrong way on things that we didn't choose to do. So with that, I'm going to let us all go. Thank you so much for coming. If you like what we do, support us, go on Rumble, like us, all that jazz. If you like the flag and whatnot, like to enter into the raffle, it's $20 a piece. I'm trying to raise some money because we do this because it needs to happen. And so I'd appreciate your support. Tomorrow, we're having a special event again with a couple of city council candidates and quite a few things coming on. And so if I have your email, I'll keep you in touch and everything. And if I don't see you, everybody have a great Thanksgiving. But I hope to see you tomorrow. So take care. Be safe going home. Thank you so much.